So good evening. Good evening to everybody, and hello. Welcome to you all to this evening's discussion around rediscovering media and communication studies at the University of Liverpool. And in terms of this evening session, we have a very interesting session lined up for you, where you will hear from a very eminent panel of our academic leads from the Department of Communication and Media Studies at the University of Liverpool. And they will share their thoughts and views on some of the recent trends and developments in the fields of communication, media, data science, politics, and strategic communications, and also analyze the interplay and impact of each of these areas. Before we begin, I would like to introduce the panel very briefly. So to start off, we have Professor Kay O'Halloran, who is the head of Department Communication Media Studies. And Kay is the chair, professor, and HOD at the University of Liverpool at the Department of Communication Media Studies. Her research field is multimodal analysis, and it involves the study of the interaction of language with other resources in text, interactions, and events. We then have Dr. Les Roberts, who is the postgraduate taught director and program leader for the MA in Media, Culture, and Everyday Life. Dr. Roberts is a reader in cultural media studies, and he has a background in anthropology and cultural studies. And the core focus of his work explores the intersection between space, place, mobility, and memory. We have Dr. Elena Musi also joining us today, who is the program leader for MSc Data Science and Communication. Elena is a lecturer in communication and media, and her research interweaves artificial intelligence and communication sciences with the broad aim of tracing back in a critical perspective debates about new technologies and their global impact. We also have Dr. Gary Needham, who is the program leader in MA Screen Studies. Gary is a senior lecturer in film and media, and his disciplinary specialism is in film and television studies. His research on American film is both historical and theoretical, with an emphasis on marginalized, alternative, avant-garde, and independent films and filmmakers. We then have Dr. Tom Nicholls, who is a program leader in MA Media, Data, and Society. And Dr. Nicholls is a lecturer in the Department of Communication and Media Sciences, and he specializes in computational political communication, and his main research interests include the analysis of news text using computational methods and the development of new methods for studying political behavior online. We have Dr. Rudi Palmieri also joining us today. Dr. Palmieri is senior lecturer in strategic communications. He has published extensively on the role of argumentation in different contexts of strategic communication, including corporate, financial, and crisis communications. We have Dr. Antal Wozniak, who is program leader in MA Media and Politics. And Dr. Wozniak is a lecturer in media and politics who specializes in political communication and has interest in group politics. And his research focuses in particular on how the media around the world reports about the issues of climate change and environmental politics. We're also very pleased to announce that the Department of Communication and Media Studies has launched a number of brand new postgraduate taught programs. Details of the same will be shared with you all throughout the session via chat. And to help lead this evening's conversation, we are delighted to have an eminent industry expert with us, Ms. Vasundhara Mudgil, who, in addition to being a thought leader, is also head of communications at Spotify India. So Vasundhara, thank you for leading the session for us. The floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Rohit. It's really good to be here. I've actually been in the PR and comms industry for nearly 13 years now. And I've actually had the opportunity to work with colleagues who come from a communications background, but also from very different backgrounds. So, when I got the opportunity to sort of moderate this session, I realized it would also be a learning session for me, because there are so many aspects of like media and communications that we often don't realize when we work every day on whatever we're doing. But the truth is that so many of these elements, whether it's the political part of it or the data science part of it, they've all become a very important and integral part of media and communications today. So we do live in a very different world today than we did maybe, when I started out back in 2007. We're in a world that's constantly evolving. News is happening online. We don't reach out to the media today. The media reaches out to us because they've read something about the company or the brand online. Many of you who live in India have seen this happen with platforms such as Twitter. So I think I'm just going to kick off this session with Professor K, because it would be great for all of us to understand a few reasons why anyone should pursue a formal education in this sector.
Okay, for Sandra, thank you so much. It's delightful to meet you, and we're very, very happy to be here. It is an interesting time for communication and media, you know, as a field of study, because the huge impact that it's having on the world today. You know, digital technology and media, they pervade just about every aspect of our lives, both personally, you know, in our own private lives, but also professionally. And so, in a sense, the impact, I mean, it's got to be understood, you know, both for your own sense of understanding the world itself. I mean, and if you look at the background I've got here, I mean, all of this was, you know, portrayed through the media. And as we can see, it has huge implications, both for political processes and any sort of processes, you know. But not only that, of course, businesses and different sectors of society, I mean, are heavily involved, of course, in creating media to disseminate messages. So, I mean, if I think about it really, I think the reason why you would study communication and media is for your own sense of understanding about the world, your own sense of, you know, personal empowerment, the ability to be able to read a message and not just read it superficially, but read it critically and really understand, you know, what sort of meanings are being made and for what sort of purposes. So it sort of empowers you personally, but also you can create then effective messages yourself. You know, if you want to put across your own point of view or you want to explain something, if you understand how communication works, but not only the language, the images and the videos, but also the digital ecosystem itself. You know, because digital platforms are integrated, you know, we know we've got social media, news media and so forth. And so I guess, you know, I would say both for personal reasons and also professional reasons, because understanding communication and media just opens up so many opportunities across different fields and, you know, professions. I mean, I'm just trying to think government, marketing, publishing, you know, any industry sector, media industries, education and so forth. We can go right across political, you know, government and so forth. So, you know, it's an exciting field. You know, we're really at an interesting intersection of the social technical. And if you want to find out about the world, you know, if students do and how it operates today, study communication and media.
Great. And does anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add to that as well. In the, I mean, communication and media, it's always kind of been a bit of a mixed bag in terms of disciplinary affiliations and what kind of perspectives that you're bringing to the subject area. But this is more so than ever now. It's a subject area that really sits on the interface of a whole number of different disciplines. So it's a really smart move on that basis alone, because you've got this kind of more than factor. You're getting more than just, well, there's a debate whether media and communication studies is a discipline. I don't personally think it is. It's more of a subject area or more of a commingling of different perspectives. And you can take it in any number of different directions. So that's exciting in itself, because there's lots of possibilities and opportunities that come with that. I mean, just one more recent kind of affiliations or directions it's going in is, you know, one of the reasons why we're here today talking about, you know, data science and, you know, what discussions and conversations we can have with, you know, that side of academia as well. So there's lots of different configurations and ways that communication and media is plugged into a whole range of different kind of perspectives and disciplinary backgrounds.
Thank you so much. That's a wonderful segue into my next question, actually. So outside of the changing media landscape, one of the really interesting things or the trends that is happening today is the role of data in any sort of communication today. And, you know, maybe till a decade ago, this data was used predominantly by companies, by the government, to make sense of, you know, citizen or consumer insights for their own business or to govern better. But today, you know, good data mining pretty much means great storytelling. And from a writer's perspective, data analytics just make for such great stories that catch the reader's attention. So how do you think the intersection of data and media impact the future? Dr. Tom, if you could take this one.
I think both sides are really still present. I think that's one of the reasons why the area is exciting. I don't think that sense that data allows you to understand your customers, to be able to take forward the business side of your work, the segmentation. I don't think any of that stuff has gone away. If you're a media business, for example, nowadays online, you know more about your customers than media businesses ever have before, and you need those data skills, and you need a good source of information in order to be able to, to be able to deliver the products and services that you're looking for. Coupled to that, though, I think you're absolutely right. There is an increasing focus on data-driven storytelling. I know data journalism is a new, possibly a new subfield of journalism, where a lot of really great pieces of work are coming out of. But I also think that some of this is a matter of scale and some of it's a matter of skills. So there have always been sources of data available for journalism in some areas. A lot of it's required a lot of very manual digging, and that's a lot easier now because large quantities of data are available online. But it also means that there's a need for a new kind of journalist almost to be able to work with those, or a collaboration between journalists and data people. Once you've got the raw materials for a really good data-driven story, you then need the skills in order to be able to understand what you've got, to be able to analyze it. You need computational tools. You need to be able to visualize the result into something which then presents really, really well to your audience. And so there's a whole space opening up of people who are not just journalists and not just technical people, but actually have something of both. And I think this is something that both the MA that I'm leading and also Eleanor's MSc, that's kind of the space that we're looking at, that there are a lot of people who have backgrounds in one or another of these areas and would rather have both, because actually that's where a lot of the value is in the modern world. So yeah, I think it's a very exciting place to be.
I believe, a couple of other panelists would like to sort of comment on this as well. So, Dr. Les, Elena, would you like to add on as well?
Yes, sure. Just to add on what Tom has greatly described in terms of like ecosystem, I think we also have like new participants in communication in general, which are somehow, right, bots or softwares somehow. So we also have to deal with human-computer interaction. So there's like computer-mediated communication through different platforms, but also there's a new interface in terms of communication and also in terms of like communication channels. So as communication specialists, we do need these skills to be able to inform and improve and guide also these new forms of communication that are greatly important, of course, right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to add in terms of how we think about data and how we approach it from maybe different perspectives, and the idea that, data equals the idea that you can tell stories through that, which of course you can in many, many different ways. I mean, one example I could give here, an area that I've done some work in recently is called deep mapping, which encompasses a wide range of different kind of perspectives. I'm not sure there's a consensus around what it is, but if you get the sense of someone trying to, read a paper map now, it just seems so ridiculously antiquated. You're halfway up a mountain and the wind's blowing, you've got a big sheet of paper, and then you've got a digital map. Well, is it a map? Okay, well, it's a map, but it's a different form of map. So within deep mapping, data has a big role. But there's a contested nature of how that data is used, or what in fact that data is. So on some end of that spectrum within deep mapping, you've got people from geographical information systems, geospatial kind of experts who are using spatial technologies and feeding from that, feeding off of huge data sets. So data's feeding this constantly evolving locative information, which is having a massive impact on how we think about our local spaces and places and things like that. But there's an other end of the spectrum where people aren't doing that. They're just, they would even contest whether data is itself something that, has an active role in that, because it kind of limits storytelling. So there's all these interesting debates about the nature of agency and the human element in all of these kind of debates and different ways of understanding the world through these new technologies. So for me, the word data is interesting because there's a cultural politics underpinning all that, which is a really interesting area to get stuck into.
I think I find data really fascinating. And, at Spotify, for instance, the data scientist teams work so closely with the business teams, with the communications team. Many people on this call might be familiar with Wrapped, which is the year-end campaign we do at Spotify, and all of that is database storytelling. So I mean, I actually love sitting with data, whether it's artist data or just like music and podcast data. It gives you such a good sense of even trends in the market. It tells you what people are consuming. There is so much cultural relevance as well. So I think I'm all for data storytelling, and it's a gray area for many people, but fascinating nonetheless. And I think outside of data analysis, external circumstances play a very important role in the messaging for any company and the media we pick to deliver our message. And what's happening today is that most people are going to online mediums to deliver that message first, because that's what's reaching the entire world. So at the University of Liverpool, how are you bringing together the key pillars of politics, media, and communications? And how does all of that fit in with the idea of strategic communications? Dr. Rudi, if you would like to take that one.
Yes, thank you. I think part of the answer is in what already some of my colleagues like Kay and Tom have said, that here in our department with our students, we don't look at communication as a kind of technical activity. We don't want our students to become technical communicators, but we want to become critical analysts, that we understand communication critically. And this means understanding the role of context in communication, that any message, whether it's from brands, but also from media and public sources, always happens in a context. And taking into account the context, the political, the media, the cultural, the business context where messages happen, it's crucial, not just to understand them, not just to interpret their meaning, but also because the way we communicate has an influence on the context itself, on the environment where we interact. So there are certain ways of communicating in society that can have a positive impact, like, for instance, promoting democratic decisions, including people, promoting intercultural exchange. But there are other forms of communication which instead have a negative impact. They may instead create division, polarization, exclusion, and so on. So that's also the idea that we have about strategic communication, not something like understanding the techniques to persuade people, or not only that, but it's about how to understand this dynamic, this connection between messages and context in a way that we understand not only the opportunities, but also the risks that exist in communication.
Thank you so much for that. And Dr. Elena, would you like to add to that?
Very briefly, I think that what's really important is also to account for the role played by strategic communication in crisis scenarios, right? So let's think about the pandemic and COVID-19. So being able to understand what are the best ways to communicate about like risks to the larger population is actually a really crucial and essential and can save lives. So if you will become like an expert in communication and also related to data and the digital world, you also have the chance to make a true difference, even at the policy level.
I really, really sort of enjoy crisis communication, by the way. I think it's such a great way to learn and grow. And yeah, you know, it's often intertwined with, of course, consumers, but also with like policies in a country as well. And we're seeing that landscape change in every market pretty much every single day, the way the government and the citizens sort of interact and the brands interact. So that also brings me to my next question, because the value and importance of arts and culture have always played a very important role when it comes to media and communication studies. So in the interdisciplinary landscape of higher education today, it's even truer and more urgent today than it has ever been. How do these more broadly cultural perspectives inform teaching and research in media studies at the University of Liverpool, and why should they matter to a student? Dr. Les, if you could take this one, please.
Yeah, sure. It kind of goes back to what I was saying before about the kind of open-ended nature of what media and communication studies is. It crosses over so many different pathways. And the idea of culture itself, I mean, I don't even really know what that means. Raymond Williams, the great sociologist, said, cultural theorist, said it was one of the two most difficult words to define in the English language. But it's there nonetheless. And we, you know, we're not just talking about media, we're talking about media cultures. We're talking about, you know, how these are manifest, the practices, how they're kind of put into practice and things like that. I mean, there are different meanings of culture, but what we do, or particularly in the program that I'm the lead on, media culture and everyday life, and also in Gary's as well, screen studies, the more cultural element of you know, what falls under media and communication studies is what we kind of push to the foreground a bit more. Now, what that means is another thing. I mean, culture in some respects in the digital age is being reduced to kind of content. You know, it's just something that the platforms kind of host and channel, and we consume it and things like that. And of course it is there. But I mean, within the department, you know, there are experts who've done the research on different cultural forms, different cultural practices, whether this be film, photography, the visual arts, and Gary can speak to this as well. Digital cultures, you know, so that there are different kind of cultures at play that inform what we're looking at as scholars in communication and media studies. And how do we negotiate that? I mean, in one way is it feeds into the idea of cultural industries. So the cultural industries become much more bigger players and really important players. Why should we be interested in the cultural industries? Well, we're not just looking at them discretely in terms of what they do, it's how they link up to other areas of the economy and society. So coming from somewhere like Liverpool, which, you know, and the work we've done in the department, which links up very much with the cultural industries in the city around regeneration, capital of culture initiatives, things like this. There's a real premium on how we think about and use culture in the way it fits into things like place branding, how you brand a city, create ideas of identity and things like that, how you manage cultural heritage, how you accommodate different perspectives of what that might mean. Tourism comes into that. So, you know, museums as media, the city itself as a form of media, the smart city, things like that. So there's culture in that sense, in terms of the culture industries, but just briefly, just to end, there's culture in another way, which is culture as a way of life. So this is the kind of more anthropological way of thinking about media cultures. And this is really what we're focusing on in media culture in everyday life. It's really just saying, you know, we don't just do media. It's not just a thing, you know, we consume and that's it. It's an integral part of our everyday life. It has massive impacts and changes the nature of how we think of ourselves, our bodies, how, you know, the selfie is now a thing. You know, how do we deal with that? It has, as I was saying before, impacts on our ideas of space and place, or time and memory and things like that. So it has, looking at culture that way, the culture that we live, how is digital media technologies changing that? And you know, should we be worried, or what questions should we be asking? How do we get control of that? These kinds of things. This and other things is what we're looking at.
Those are some really great points. And coincidentally, I was talking to an agency today, and they actually said, we're building a team that just focuses on culture communications, like it, and that is so open-ended, right? As you said, like culture can mean so many things. So they work with brands, but make sure those brands are integrated into culture with whatever work they're doing with these brands. And it can mean so many things for so many brands, but it is the way we live our lives today. So I think you mentioned that Dr. Gary has something to add to this as well. So over to you, Dr. Gary.
Hi. Yes, just to build on what Les says about the importance of art and culture to communication media. I mean, culture is always organic and evolving, and art is one of the expressions of that. And I don't mean art in terms of the gallery, but the things that we consume and produce as mediated forms, as well as non-mediated forms. You know, art and culture is really a document of our life. And as Les says, it is such a broad thing that it requires the interdisciplinary approach that our department excels at, in a way, is by bringing data science together with textual analysis and anthropology and all these disciplinary crossovers. You know, Les mentioned selfies, which maybe go back to Renaissance art. It might be just the technology that's new, but not the practice of the selfie itself, and the idea of desiring a portrait of ourselves and putting it out there in the world. And of course, given the pandemic, our consumption of art and culture has increased. In fact, many of us have relied on things like Netflix to get us by while we're stuck indoors. So
and Spotify.
And Spotify, yeah, I do like Spotify. I am a Spotify subscriber. So I guess the way me and Les might want to think about this sort of pandemic is that it's not just, say, news media, but the way that media has been meaningful to our lives under lockdown. So very much a kind of cultural, anthropological approach. And in arts and culture, we should analyse them because they're central to how we define ourselves. Older scholars might have talked about taste, but now we can talk about things like likes and tweets and emojis and how they have the value attached to them today more than, say, a taste in a particular type of food or literature. And, you know, it's also the place where we find emotions. We find our emotional self, and emotions are also political. They're also things that can be mediated. They're also a form of communication. And emotions are central, again, like art and culture, to our sense of humanity. We might think that emotion as a process of affect is what leads us to action and understanding. It might lead someone to produce a work of graffiti or a protest sign for Black Lives Matter. And what is our position on something like graffiti? Is it street art? Is it a nuisance? Who is it addressing? Are people doing that because they can't find a voice in mainstream media to express a particular viewpoint? So why is that one mechanism of communication that one group uses but not another? So art and culture really are there to make a difference in the world. And our question for us might be, well, how does that work? How do these things actually work? And although, as someone who works in film and television studies, that also is about the question of entertainment and the idea of entertainment as a business. Entertainment's an abstract thing, like pleasure and feeling. You go to a movie and it makes you feel good. But how is that feeling turned into capital? What is the political economy of feeling good after seeing something in the media that has been pleasurable for us? What's the point of them? I mean, we could think about the popular Indian cinema. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And in the MA screen cultures, one would look at, say, the political economy of Bollywood, the relationship between the film and music industries, so the synergy between screen culture and sound culture. We might look at the films as cultural texts and heritage and memory and history around, say, a figure like Lata Mangeshkar, who's someone you hear but don't see on the screen. And the use of language, Hindi, Urdu, English, and the general sense in which, say, Indian cinema, particularly as Bollywood, through the process of globalization, is how the West might see India. It's through its mediation on screen through popular entertainment. Maybe people in the West think everybody breaks into a song and dance every now and again. So there are lots of kind of questions raised, but of course that's not the end of the story. Is Bollywood art? Is it, I mean, it's certainly culture. Then there's the figure of someone like Satyajit Ray, the Bengali filmmaker. For a long time, Western audiences only knew Indian cinema through films like Pathar Panchali. So there are lots of kind of interesting questions raised around art and culture, how it's mediated and communicated. And a lot of those questions are very much about the relationship between the present and the past.
I think art and culture, of course, has such a positive impact on society, right? And it's something that's brought all of us together. Like what I'm sitting and watching here is the same thing that my friends sitting in the US are watching or elsewhere are watching, right? But I think there are also negative elements of it, and one such thing is fake news. So that's actually my one final question on the industry before we talk more about what the University of Liverpool has to offer. The recent phenomenon of fake news is being taken up really seriously by tech companies, especially, and by governments around the world. How will this impact media in the future, both from a media and a messaging perspective? Dr. Elena, we'll start with you this time.
So yeah, the digital revolution and the network society has caused a big change, right, in the way we do perceive the news and the consequences that news have on the world at large. So in the past, people would assume that whatever they would read on newspapers, official newspaper, would be true. But then in the last 7 years, the fake news became a buzzword. And you probably also heard or like read articles talking about the infocalypse, or like the post-truth world. So we actually live in a world where it's very difficult to discard what's true and instead like what's false. Why is that so important industry-wise and for also tech companies? Well, because if you're not well informed, we can't really make good decision-making processes, right? So think about a political propaganda. It would work if the audience believes that what is said during the propaganda is actually true. And then, of course, if the audience believes in something which actually is not true, because maybe it's a deep fake, or it's like spread by digital bots, but is totally blatantly false news, these can have terrible consequences. So combining data science and communication, we can definitely debunk, but we can also pre-bunk information and fake news. And so we can think and build ways to identify fake news online. And also we can also build tools and technologies and ways of communicating that would like prevent fake news in the first place to be spread and to have like terrible consequences in a sort of like Black Mirror scenario that you are probably familiar with.
Thank you. And Dr. Antal, would you like to add to this as well?
Oh, yeah, I would like to do that because, of course, the spread of fake news and disinformation, which has been partly actually facilitated just by the technical infrastructure that Facebook, Google, and other big companies have provided. It has huge ramifications, of course, for politics, right? For politics at large, not just, when we look at decision makers and the types of decisions they actually make on all kinds of issues. But also on public deliberations, on how everyone like us, right, every citizen engages with politics, talks about politics. Because the big problem is not so much that there is propaganda out there. That has always been the case, right? The political actors kind of spinning their own stories, putting their particular perspective on things, trying to speak to a particular constituency, with all the problems that this entails, of course. So we have seen that, and even misinformation, or disinformation has happened before. What is problematic at the moment is that it seems that we are actually losing common ground in that we are not really able to talk about similar issues, right? Misinformation can sometimes be corrected by just talking to each other and then realizing, oh, I was wrong about that, right? I have to adjust my knowledge and my related attitudes to that. But coming back to the role of data-driven or algorithm-driven engagement with politics or other types of news. Another problem is that what we call echo chambers, right, that do exist, that have been facilitated by the likes of Facebook, because Facebook, wants you to stay on their interface for as long as possible because they need your attention to sell your attention to advertisers. This is how they make money. So if you engage with a certain topic or with a certain viewpoint on a topic, right, Facebook will suggest to you other kind of content that fits that particular narrative or that particular perspective. So people are actually kind of pushed into these echo chambers where they only get types of information about issues, certain perspectives that kind of fits their pre-existing beliefs. And that you can imagine over time, people just move away from each other, not just in terms of pro and contra on a particular issue, but we're talking about completely different things, right? How are we able to then reach common ground? And we see some of the problems that has created over time. For example, when we just look at the United States of America, right, which we always believe to be a very healthy and strong, democracy, where we now have this. And they always had polarization there to some extent, right? There was always kind of political conflict, but now people are almost living in different realities because their media diets are vastly different. And here we see the connection between both what we call legacy media, like big news outlets. Think about CNN and Fox News, which also tell completely different narratives about politics. But then add to that the role of social media, where people share their views and all of that, and the echo chambers they create. So what we try to do is, first of all, to understand what's going on, right? It is very complicated and complex, but we can analyze it. We have to analyze it to think of ways to counter some of those very bad developments. And also to become more literate and more knowledgeable about what is going on for ourselves, so that we can become, basically better citizens.
I think this is super interesting, and it does bring me to my next question and to a little bit more about what's at the university for students. So we've already talked a little bit about the relationship between media, communications, and politics through the session. But how do you think that affects the society, which you've partly covered, but also the career prospects? So if somebody comes to the University of Liverpool, they pick one of these multiple courses, like what are the career prospects like for someone who studies any of these courses? We'll actually start this one with you since you have the stage, Dr. Antal.
Me? Yeah, okay, fine. So I'm going to talk for the MA Media and Politics right now. Looking at career prospects, well, they are very diverse indeed, right? Because what we deliver and what we teach are, of course, as Rudi has said as well, critical thinking, but also analytical thinking. I think that's quite important. Just a little aside, the Media and Politics program is a very social scientific program. So we're not just going to discuss the very complex connections between the media system and the political system and what it means for public opinion and our daily lives, but we will also teach research methods and how to use statistics, right? How to use data, how to interpret data to understand the world a bit better. And then it really depends on what you want to do, right? So we have alumni from previous years who have actually gone on to, for example, work for members of parliament, right, of the British Parliament. So either in their Westminster offices in London or in their constituent offices, wherever they are based, usually as communication and media officers. So they're very much engaged in trying to communicate what the MPs want to say, but also really sitting at the intersection between the politicians and the wider public. And that is, of course, fascinating. We have other students who have gone on to companies like PricewaterhouseCoopers and those big professional service companies as analysts, specialist analysts for all kinds of policy areas, right? Because they have learned how to analyze that, how to analyze any kind of communication, how to look at data and make sense of data, and how to communicate about that. Other students are actually already currently working with political parties, on political campaigning, things like that. And then, yes, of course, some students actually enjoy academia so much that they go on and pursue a doctorate degree, either with us or with another university, and then really conduct their own research. which we teach them how to do, because in our courses, right, this is what every student will do towards the end in their final project dissertation, with supervision and support to conduct their own research, so where you can follow your own interests, really, yeah, find out the things that you want to find out about the world.
Clearly a lot of academia loving panelists today, all the doctors. All right, Dr. Gary, would you like to add to that as well?
Yes, and I think one of the things that Antal said that's incredibly important is that it's also about making better citizens and a better world through learning and education. And he's also right that the possibilities that are opened up by studying communication and media and all its manifestations across the portfolio of MAs creates a wealth of opportunity. One of the things I'm interested in teaching my students on the Screen Cultures MA is about programming. I don't mean that in terms of computer programming, but curating festivals, organising cultural media texts in a way that are meaningful and can be passed on to society and culture, whether that's for politics or whether that's for pleasure. And getting students to understand how the media and cultural studies, the media and cultural industries work, puts graduates in a much better position of understanding any industry that they wish to pursue a career in. And as we said at the start, you know, our lives are mediated more than ever. And many of us don't have access anymore to the direct experience of things like, say, for example, war. It's all mediated. So we're interested in creating graduates that have a better understanding of the world. And that could be thinking about digital inequality. Who has access to digital media and digital media use in particular technology? Who's controlling that media? Is it the state or the user? How is that being used? So what we're interested in having graduates leave with is a sort of literacy in understanding the world as it's mediated and communicated. So media literacy and communication literacy, which relates to things that have been brought up already, like fake news, for example, becomes increasingly more important to our discipline. And we're there to provide the analytical tools and the theoretical frameworks and methodologies to help you and enable you to understand the world better.
Thank you. Dr. Tom, the next one is actually for you. You know, of course, we've talked a fair bit about big data, data mining, and digital media today, but what are the implications of big data on the digital media industry today? And has it already changed the way we consume content? Is there really something interesting? Like, are there any interesting projects that, say, students would get to work on when they join the university, when it comes to really understanding what's going on with the digital media industry and how the contemporary media is sort of evolving?
So one of the exciting aspects of MA and MSc study at Liverpool is that we have a dissertation option. In fact, we have a dissertation, which is part of the MA and MSc, and that gives you the opportunity to work in depth on a subject that you are particularly interested in. So whatever your interest in this area or in any other, if we have any expertise to supervise it, we're delighted to help you get your teeth into that. In terms of the impact, I think there's maybe, again, two sides of it. One of them is the effect of changed consumption patterns on consumption of content on the sort of demand side, and the other one is on the changing economics of the industry that have come out of that. So obviously we're no longer in a world where there is a channel that puts out its own content which people watch continuously. We're not in a world where there is a daily newspaper which you pick up, or you pick up one of a choice of daily newspapers. So a lot of people are now getting access to their news, to their other content through platforms, be it Spotify, be it Facebook is a prominent place that a lot of people go and get their news, a surprisingly large number. So So there's an effect on the news and on the people who read the news and who access the content. The content which is selected is not selected in the same way that it used to be. That it used to be that there was an editor who decided what went in the newspaper, and now you have a much more complicated algorithmic selection process where the individual's own preferences and the footprint they've built up and the friends they've got and what they previously clicked on all generates a sort of opaque method of surfacing content. And there are definitely worries that leads to echo chambers. There is also some evidence, interestingly, that you get a more diverse view of the world using this kind of approach than you did before, because previously you would probably read one newspaper and therefore you would be given content by one editor. And now, even if you are mostly getting the same sort of things as your friends, that actually turns out in many cases to be more diverse than otherwise. So it's not just a one-way situation. And the other one is, again, very much on the business side. The other major use of data and data analytics has been in changing the economics of how this stuff is paid for. That the advertising market used to be quite straightforward. You decided where you wanted to place your adverts, and then you place the content with them and sent them a big check, and that all worked out quite cleanly. If you were the major local newspaper, you got classified advertising revenues, which in some countries were huge. You got big display adverts. You were, the place to go to. And now we live in a world where the advertising market is cut up into smaller slices, and the large majority of the money goes to the service providers. It goes to Facebook, to Google and the other people who run the ad network. So that, I think, has almost done more to change the nature of journalism and news than the consumption side has. Yes, there are definitely challenges and opportunities on the consumption end. There's more scope to do interesting things than there used to be. But on the supply side, there's a lot less money, because the money that is still in advertising, has always been in advertising, now going into different hands. So there's a whole second dynamic about how content is paid for, be that by subscription on the Spotify model. Quite a lot of newspapers are going down that line now, or whether you can make a play for scale, or try something completely new. So people have tried to build video news platforms, for example, in order to make money off that. So there's a huge amount of sort of flux. I don't think the models for how things are going to play out in the future are set in stone yet. I think people are still exploring the space, and I think that provides, again, a good opportunity for people who are interested to really get stuck in and find out what's going on.
I think, yeah, all of us just live in such a personalized world, right? We only read, we only listen, we only watch content that appeals to us, and the algorithms get that. Dr. Elena, Dr. Gary, I'd love to hear from you on this as well.
Well, I'm quite interested in the question of algorithms and the way it shapes our media consumption, and we have a lot of students who've done work in terms of their research and assessment on Netflix. And they often come to Netflix thinking it's this abundant source of media content. But of course, when you go looking for something, you can't find it. So it gives this, it's paradoxical in that it presents itself as endless choice, but any attempt to look for something that you want to watch, and rather as opposed to being told you should be watching, brings up a number of problems. So we're interested in the way in which media consumption and our agency to choose what we watch, and the illusion of choice is problematic. Another way that algorithmic culture has been an important classroom discussion is around the way it can be used to censor, control, and regulate, particularly people who don't have their representation or voice in more mainstream media forms. So Tumblr is a good example of that. It had removed a lot of content relating to LGBT people all of a sudden overnight. And it removed that space of sharing and curating and seeing others like themselves in the digital world. And the algorithm said no. For example, and we're seeing that as someone who also works on art, that there's a confusion between art and pornography, where historical examples of, say, the nude in Renaissance art are getting caught up with contemporary algorithms that can't tell the difference It can't do what human judgment can and say that's pornography. So there's a lot of work still to be done. So I'm very interested in that, and the students are, in terms of how algorithms are shaping media consumption, but are also playing a central role in the regulation of choice and what we can and cannot see or post or like or have access to.
Those are some really good points. Dr. Elena, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, just to briefly add on all of this, I think from a more data science perspective, what's really important is to reflect on how to build better recommendation systems to avoid, of course, bias. And we can do that if we rethink the design of recommendation systems, both from a conceptual and a technical, and also in a technical perspective, to inform algorithms in a better way. And of course, this redesigning of recommendation systems will have consequences on all the aspects that have been touched upon. Of course, this doesn't happen one day after the other, and that's why we need, right, to a new generation of citizens that have both technical and conceptual skills to critically make this change happen.
Can I just come in, Eleanor? Do they need to be made visible, I think, to people as well? I mean, at the moment, it's all going on, where people don't understand how these algorithms are working. What do you think about that? Would that be possible to make that sort of visible, how the choices are made and so forth?
That's a lot to do with this so-called explainable AI that is like a very hot topic again, and an area and domain of research like right now. Of course, sometimes this is possible, sometimes it's not, but definitely it's a very important path to aim for in the future.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in as well on this question. I was just reframing the question in terms of the impacts on consumption, or how it's changed media cultures. So again, it's kind of adding that kind of cultural element to it, and thinking about what's changed. And it might be kind of negative. There's elements of backlash against the way media content is consumed. I mean, Spotify is a very alien music culture from the one I grew up with 12-inch LP sleeves and the artwork and the materiality of music and things like that, which of course has had a massive resurgence in recent years. So I mean, there's probably many different reasons for that, but part of it is, perhaps there's some sense of an insubstantiality of the digital culture that dominates consumption patterns today, and there's a kind of hunger for these kind of other forms of media cultures. And just to briefly link it back to the previous question, where we're talking about what skills and where this might lead to career options. I mean, one of the things that all of the programs are aiming to do is develop a kind of joined up thinking in terms of the important intellectual questions are being asked, the theoretical frameworks that we're exposing students to, and how these can be translated into practical outcomes. Okay, and one example that we do on the media culture and everyday life one is, we pose the question, what is an archive? Okay, it's a simple question. I've no idea what an archive is today. What is memory? Is it something you plug into your USB stick, or is memory storage? So there's lots of really interesting questions which can start from these very elemental questions. How do we conceive what an archive is, and how it might change the conceptions and the cultures that underpinned how people engage with archives? How are these shifted, and how is that in turn impacting on people's consumption practices and their cultures and things like that? So there's a linkage between, it's not theory for theory's sake. We're inviting intellectual critical engagement for a good reason. And so if you're thinking about what an archive is, and you're studying media culture in everyday life, you will also have the opportunity of talking to a curator or someone who's done a lot of work professionally in curating exhibitions that might have an online content, that might have an actual gallery, physical content and things like that, and how you navigate this kind of world. And one last point on this is that it's important to kind of get the message across to students that, yeah, I mean, there are kind of ways to do this, and we give you the skills and the techniques to kind of, navigate that. But it's such a fast changing field. It's just elemental creativity is what is looked for. How you can creatively apply ideas. And these are what employers are looking for as well. You know, it's like, you tell us, you know, we're looking for new ways of thinking about things. So there's a lot of scope for that, and a lot of what we do on the programs kind of caters for that and nurtures it, really.
I think it's a great response for the usual recruitment question around what can you do for us? So yeah, I think that's so true, because you know, again, when I maybe went to like a communication school, it was primarily theoretical, and then I went to business school at some point, and it really changes the way you think and do things, because there is so much like touch and feel. There's like tangible, you know, there are projects, you get sort of industry experience, and that really impacts how you also think about things. It's not just theory you're taking away, but you're thinking about, as you said, like we've grown up learning that memory is that USB, you know, that you plug into your laptop, but it could mean so many different things today. So I know we're on time pretty much, but we've got 3 more questions left, so I'm going to cover them real quick. Dr. Elena, the next one is for you. Why should a data scientist consider an industry switch to media and entertainment?
Yeah, so I'll answer drawing on my personal experience, since before joining the University of Liverpool, I was working in industry. I was building Amazon Alexa as a computational linguist, so more on the data science side of things. And what I noticed is that, you know, of course, it's a corporation, so there are like lots of different teams working together, and all the issues really are at the intersections. Because of course you can build great codes, but then probably these are not really suitable for the type of information that you might to convey. And this means also that the entire process of pipeline of production, right, is like slowed down due to these discrepancies. So I could see also in industry in general, as a consultant, like later on, there are like new employment opportunities and new professional figures that are really at the crossroads in between the 2 fields, such as technical project managers. You need to know data science and at the same time also communication if you want to build any product that has to do with language. And this means that you can basically work anywhere, from news media agencies to any AI type of you know, corporation or startup, and at the same time also instead work for an NGO that has to do with like research and inform like policy making. So I'd say if you manage to combine during your education data science skills and communication and critical skills, basically you do have superpowers right now, and probably for the next like 20 years, I'd say.
I wish I had those superpowers 10 years ago, but that's okay. All right, Dr. Tom, would you like to add to that?
I entirely agree with what Eleanor said. I would also just say that another good reason for data scientists to get interested in communications, we have some really fabulous problems at the moment. There's a lot of opportunities for doing interesting work. We got a lot of good data. A lot of the language questions that are open are fascinating from a data science and a communications perspective. So it's fun as well as putting you in good stead for the future.
Great. That brings me to my second last question. And I think, Dr. Elena, you will be again best suited to answer this one. But again, earlier in the evening, we did talk about fake news. We talked about, you know, how technology can sort of really step in and help control that. In that context, where does machine learning stand today? And I know, you know, there was some conversation around there needs to be human intervention as well. So what's your take on machine learning versus human intervention and the general impact of this innovation on contemporary media?
Yeah, I can provide a brief answer when it comes to fake news specifically, since here at the University of Liverpool, we are conducting a research project on that. And so right now there are machine learning systems that are using, you know, deep learning, you probably heard about it, that are able to detect with a decent accuracy, blatantly false information. But when it comes to misleading information, that's a very difficult problem and challenge to solve. One of those fun problems that Tom was talking about. And we are working on 2 sides of the issue. So on one side is building somehow algorithms, right, machine learning algorithms that are able to detect at least some forms of misinformation. And on the other side, also building tools that instead would help us, humans and citizens, how to learn how to actually identify those misleading news. So yeah, it's a very interesting and challenging issue, and again, one that I don't see solved in 2 months, but something that you can learn to tackle studying at the University of Liverpool.
Thank you. Anything you'd like to add to that, Dr. Tom?
I would agree with all of that. I would also say that in keeping with our spirit as a both critical and technical side, I think the most interesting aspects of this question are not technical. I think there's great opportunity for data science driven AI pipelines to detect this stuff. But actually, there's a whole bunch of stuff on all media that we know is false because we've had humans look at it, and we don't really know how to deal with that either. So there's a whole nexus of policy questions, of politics questions, of technical questions, and yeah. So you're getting very nice into the sort of the space in the middle where the number of people that both understand the systems and also have an understanding of, you know, how we might use those systems in order to deal with societal problems is small. It's a good place to be.
Thank you. And now down to the question that's probably on every student's mind. What is the career scope after a degree in media and communications? I feel there's so much you can potentially do, but we'll let the experts speak. And what are the prominent sectors available to a student after obtaining the kind of degrees available at the university? So Dr. Rudi, we'll start with you, and Dr. Antal, if you could also add on from there, please.
So I think from what has been also said so far, communication is so pervasive, especially with the digitalization of communication, that I think the opportunities are really very widespread. I mean, Antal has already mentioned before some examples. I can add a few. I mean, some of our students from our let's say old programs, existing programs like strategic communication, media and politics, they found jobs in very interesting positions in the public and in the business sector. Some have been working in marketing and PR, other more, for instance, for a political party, more to design and develop campaigns. And apart from the bravest PhD students, there are also people working with local authorities and governments in different countries. And many students found an internship, and later, based on the internship, a job in communication and PR agencies as well, in London, but also some of them in the countries where they come from. So I think that really the opportunities in different sectors where communication experts are really needed, these opportunities are really huge.
Thank you. And over to you, Dr. Antal, for the final word.
Oh, the final word. Okay, how exciting. You know, I can second that, what Rudi just said, and I gave some examples before, right? The fact is, so many sectors, have to do with communication, any kind of strategic communication, or have to make sure that they, communicate effectively with their constituencies, with their customers, whatsoever. So our students really go into all kinds of field, and it doesn't necessarily overlap, but it's similar to what's happening with the strategic communication program, that in media and politics, well, actually, as it says in the title, right, it can be very much media oriented, or it can be very much politics oriented, or actually something which is sitting right at the intersection of those two things, like, for example, being the media, the press relations officer for a political party or a member of parliament. Journalism is, of course, also an option, right, to pursue. But we don't teach, journalism practice as such. We do teach, of course, a lot about journalism as a field and as a profession, about its basic logic, and also all the challenges that the field is facing at the time. But with all this understanding and the critical thinking skills, and also the data analysis skills that we also, provide in media and politics, those are what we often call, transferable skills, but those are very much sought after by, media outlets, by political parties, non-governmental organizations, local authorities. Rudi has mentioned them as well. And it goes back to, what Les and the others have said about the ubiquitousness of communication, because this is what, holds society together, that we communicate, that we distribute and share information. And that also means that having a degree in media and communication actually opens a lot of doors. And it really depends on, what your personal interests are. And I also second what Rudi has said about internships, right? So that is something that you should definitely pursue, but that we can also help you with, at least in kind of, guiding you, or just helping you to think through, like, what is it what I want to do? Where do I want to take all those skills to make the world a better place, to make it sound a bit epic. But you can certainly do that. And even media politics students, some of them have gone into marketing, sometimes even in kind of fields or areas that they didn't really think about when they started studying with us. But because the skills are so transferable and sought after across various industries, I do see that some of our alumni are suddenly working for companies that produce medical equipment, for example. But they communicate, they analyze data, they look at user experience, they look at marketing, public relations and stuff like that. And they are very excited about what they are doing and how they can actually use the skills to do something exciting.
Great. I think we're only 10 minutes over time. That's not bad at all. That was a lot of useful information. So thank you everyone for joining us today, the students, the entire faculty. We hope you found this session useful. And, of course, I think the team has been chatting with you on the side, but do write in with any other queries you may have. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
very much.
everyone. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye. Take care. Thanks a lot.